I'm going to give it a couple minutes before I start reading. Just going to update some of this stuff on here. All right, I just did all that. Thank you for my one viewer. I'm currently making rice, chicken, and the chicken and zucchini is already made. I'm just waiting for the rice to be made. I will be munching. I'm not gonna lie, I'm hungry. But yeah, yesterday we read more about. We didn't even read yesterday. We just watched videos. Haven't been feeling too well these past couple of days, so thank you guys for waiting on me. We're almost at the actual Communist Manifesto. We're still like reading some of the background information. Seven oh three. We're gonna start reading at 7:05. How's everyone's day going? How's my one viewer? You be watching me, you might ride or die. You might ride or die. I don't even know if this is actual a viewer, if I'm being honest. Are you really there? If you're really there, comment something. I feel like this is just Twitch making me like feeling bad for me, making me feel like I have a viewer when I really don't. I'm gonna put my charger on my phone. Oh my god, we should read the fucking One Piece spoilers after this. They're gonna be so good. Alright, 7:05. I hope it's not too loud in here, guys. I'm sorry, I have the kitchen fan on. And so we're on part two of the chapter that we're in. This is called The Battle Over Christianity and the Emergence of the Young Hegelians. And I am pronouncing it right. That video yesterday showed me that I was pronouncing right. I was a little bit nervous. Sorry about this, guys. Cool. But let me see. I don't want you guys to hear any of that. All right. Sorry about that, guys. All right. The Battle Over Christianity and the Emergence of the Young Hegelians. In 1835, David Frederick Strauss published his epoch-making study, The Life of Jesus, critically examined. Strauss was from Württemberg, like Hegel himself, and also like Hegel, educated for the Protestant pastorate and the Tübingen Theological Seminary. Initially drawn to Romanticism, by the time of his graduation in 1829, Strauss had become a Hegelian. During the following 2 years as an assistant vicar in the Swabian village of Klein Angersheim, He had adequate time to ponder the Hegelian claim of identity between the dogmas of faith and the truths of philosophy. In the autumn of 1831, he left for 1 year in Berlin, where he met Hegel in 1 week before the latter succumbed to cholera. Damn. Strauss returned to Tübingen and lectured at the university, but was forced to resign his teaching position following his publication of this book. Conservatives and evangelicals believed that Strauss's book confined all their darkest suspicions about the supposed Hegelian identity between religion and philosophy. But in fact, Strauss's methodological approach owed nothing to Hegel. Nevertheless, Strauss set his conclusions firmly within a Hegel framework. If religious representation were to accord with philosophical truth, he argued that the Gospels must first be freed from the superstitious and supernatural setting in which they had originally been placed. The rational truth contained in Christianity was that of the incarnation, the union of human and divine. But the Gospels has concealed this truth behind an archaic form of representation in which the idea was embodied in a narrative about the life and activity of a single individual. If modern critical scientific consciousness were to restore Christian truth, it would have to replace the Jesus of the Gospels by the idea of humanity and the whole course of its development. For only the infinite spirit of the human race could bring about the union of finite and infinite implied in the Christian story of incarnation and translated into conceptual form in Hegel's notion of absolute spirit. Altenstein allowed the free circulation of the book in Prussia, despite its denial of the supernatural and miraculous elements of the Christian story, and despite a fierce campaign to ban the book led by Hagenstenberg and the evangelicals. But the publication of Strauss did not make a turning point. Thereafter, Altenstein found it increasingly difficult to find Hegelian's university positions, and the moderate reforming consensus which had characterized the first generation of Hegel's followers broke into what became known as right, left, and center. It was through the debate over Strauss and the imprisonment of the Archbishop of Cologne that the term young Hegelian came into being. The Cologne affair provoked a major pamphlet battle led on the Catholic side by the ultramontane publicist Joseph Gurez, and among Protestants by the Orthodox Lutheran Hegelian Heinrich Leo. But both were attacked by a radical lecturer from the University of Halle, Arnold Rouge, soon to become the main publicist of the young Hegelian movement. Rouge had recently set up Heilig Farbruch, the Annals of Halle. Sorry about that, guys. Let me turn off the rice. Let's make a little bit more headway before before I eat. So, Arnold Rouge, soon to become the main publicist of the young Hegelian movement. Rouge had recently set up a Annals of Halle, originally entitled as the Literary Feuilleton, garnering contributions from the whole spectrum of Hegelian opinion, but now also standing for the independence of scientific inquiry and the supremacy of state over church. Rouge attacked Gorez and Leo for their hostility of rationalism, which he claimed to be the essence of the Prussian state. Leo's reply was entitled Die Hegelian, the Little Hegelians. It accused the Annals of Halle and the defenders of Strauss of being enemies of religion and the state, while Hagstenberg denounced Rouge as a fomenter of atheism and revolution. Alarmed by this exchange, moderates deserted the Annals of Halle, and Altenstein backed away from the promoting Rouge to a chair. As a result, Rouge retired from the university and began to write articles directly critical of the government. The essence of Prussia, he now claimed was liberty established by the Reformation and the Enlightenment, but the state was in danger. It had fallen under the sway of Catholicism and Romantic reaction and would provoke revolution unless it returned to its true mission. Rouge also made contact with other nucleus of the young Hegelianism and the so-called Doctors' Club in Berlin, founded in 1837. The style of this club was bohemian, with meetings in favored cafes and wine cellars. Its original purpose had been academic, but in the wake of Cologne affair, it too had become drawn into the religious and political controversy. Members of the club included academics, school teachers, journalists, freelance writers, and students, notably Marx. The acknowledged intellectual leader of the club was the Berlin University lecturer Bruno Bauer. Bauer had originally been chosen to defend the orthodox reconciliation between religion and philosophy against Strauss, but in 1838 he had shifted his position and launched a sharp attack on his former supporter, Hengstenberg, the leader of the evangelical Christians. The controversy surrounding Rouge soon encompassed Bauer. In 1839, in an effort to keep him out of trouble, Altenstein had moved Bauer from Berlin to the theology faculty at Bonn, but this transfer only pushed him further towards heterodoxy. Bauer, I don't know what heterodoxy means. Let's look it up. Do you know what it means, person who's watching me? Let me see. Deviation from accepted or orthodox standards or beliefs. Okay. I don't know why everybody has to use like hard ass fucking words. This shit should be legible, like readable for everyone. But the transfer only, heterodoxy. Bauer never accepted Strauss's methodological approach. Not only did it lack a credible account of the character or composition of the Gospels, but also, in contrast to Hegel, it equated the Gospels with the apocalyptic expectations of the Old Testament, thus missing the distinctiveness of Christianity as a new stage in the development of the absolute idea. Bauer's starting point was the match between the Bible and the Hegelian idea. In his original answer to Strauss, he had attempted to establish a concordance between reason and the biblical narrative, a task he began in detail in relation to the Old Testament in 1838. In his next major work, The Criticism of the Gospel, History of John, which appeared in 1840, his position has shifted considerably. He had demonstrated that the Gospel of John was purely literary creation and that its graphic character was that of fiction. But the ultimate direction was still not entirely clear, for it still left open the possibility that the other three Gospels might contain the history that John lacked. Finally, however, in the criticism of the Gospel story of the Synoptist, which appeared in 1841-2, Bauer moved towards a position even more destructive of the factual claims of the Gospel narrative than that originally presented by Strauss. What this study showed was the distinction between John and the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, was not one of a kind, but only of degree. Bauer's approach built upon a discovery established in Orthodox biblical commentary in the 1830s that the original evangelist had been Mark. Mark had set down the original connection between events. The other gospel writers had supposedly elaborated and supplemented Mark's accounts by recourse to saying and anecdotes taken from the broader tradition. Bauer, however, gave this argument a radical and unanticipated twist. For if John could no longer count as an eyewitness, and if two of the synoptic Gospels were expansions of the first, and the third also an elaboration of the second, this suggests that the original Gospel story went back to a single author. Furthermore, the only evidence for the broader tradition supposedly drawn upon the other evangelists came from the Gospel story themselves. In other words, the broader tradition might also have been the creation of the original evangelist. This would mean that the idea of the Messiahship and its association with the ministry of Jesus had not been a matter of common knowledge before being set down in writing. More likely, it had been a way of discussing the experience of the early Christian community through the creation of a literary tradition built out of the general ideas of the time. By that time the study of the Synoptists had appeared, Bauer had already lost any chance of university employment. In 1840, both Altenstein and the old king had died, and although the first actions of the new king, Frederick William IV, had been greeted with general enthusiasm, he soon revealed himself as a romantic reactionary. Frederick William believed in personal God and in his own grace as a monarch. He also believed that all social order would disappear if the belief in revelation were undermined. Far from standing above the parties and as some of the young Hegelians had hoped, he openly expressed his dislike of Hegelianism and invited Schelling to Berlin to propose his philosophy of revelation in its place. In the spring of 1841, Rouge's Hallisch Warburg was forbidden in Prussia, and even in the Athenaeum, the tiny journal of the Doctors' Club, was closed down. In Bauer's case, the new Minister of Church and Education, Eichhorn, sent out a questionnaire to Prussian theology faculties asking whether Bauer's license to teach should be revoked for denying the divine inspiration to the Gospels. The theological facilities did not recommend dismissal, but a minor affair in Berlin on 28 September 1841, Bauer's speech at a festive dinner of the Doctors' Club to honor a visit by the South German liberal editor of the Staatslexikons, Karl Welker, led the king personally to insist that Bauer not be allowed to resume his post in Bonn. Bauer's dismissal from Bonn was finally confirmed in 1842. Before he left Bonn, he and Marx rented a pair of asses to ride through the city. The Bonn society was astonished. We cited with joy the ass's braid. Between 1840 and 1842, in response to the government hostility, the young Hegelians elaborated on a wholesale attack on Christianity and conjoined it with a Republican critique of the Prussian state. The attack on Christianity was led by Bauer. Christianity was not, as Strauss thought, grounded in the substance of tradition of Jewish apocalyptic expectation or the Old Testament God of Spinoza. It was a response to the new universal traditions or conditions of the Roman Empire. It marked the death of nature and the beginning of self-consciousness, but unfortunately only a false beginning, for Christianity did not represent a true victory over nature achieved through the knowledge of nature's laws. It was rather the projection of an individual self-conscious that withdraws from the world of a personality that grasps itself into antithesis to the world, but feels helpless to overcome it except through the false mediums of miracles. Whew! Damn. Similarly, in its portrayal of the Christ, portrayal in the Christ of Gospels, Christianity had created not a true man, but an ego alien to actual humanity. The historical Jesus had overcome the separation between human and divine only at the cost of creating a new form of religious division and alienation. Christianity, therefore, did not provide man with knowledge of himself, but only a parody of himself. Reform, as Bauer went on to insist in 1843, would require not merely the elimination of God, but an end to Christian culture with its age-old assumptions about human incapacity. In place, therefore, of Hegel's identity between religion and philosophy, Bauer presented an antithesis. He also alleged, though he knew it not to be true, that secretly this had also been Hegel's own position. In the spring of 1841, in a pseudonymous pamphlet, The Trumpet of the Last Judgment against Hegel and the Atheist and Antichrist. Hereafter the Trumpet, purportedly written by an outraged pietist pastor, Bauer assembled all the passages that pointed to an esoteric Hegel, who was not only an atheist but also a friend of subversion, disorder, and revolution, the pastor exclaimed. If one looks into what Hegel means by the reconciliation of reason and religion, it is that there is no God, and the ego has only to deal with itself in religion, whereas in religion it means to deal with a living personal God. Realized self-conscious is that play in which the ego is doubled as in a mirror, and which, after holding its image for thousands of years to be God, discovers the picture in the mirror to be itself. Religion takes that mirror image for God. Philosophy casts off the illusion and shows man that has no stands. No one. Religion takes that mirror image for God. Philosophy casts off the illusion and shows man that no one stands behind the mirror. All right, I could finish this. Let me get my food though. Let's get the food. If you want to see what I'm eating, I made harissa honey chicken, chicken breast with white rice with saffron and a charred garlic and then bay leaves. And then I made zucchini with shallots, garlic, rosemary, thyme. So I'm just going to take a couple bites, guys. I'm sorry. I don't want to munch. I'm going to respond. I could just respond talking. Sorry, if you're still here, I'm just reading Karl Marx, Fedreich Engels, the Communist Manifesto. I'm sorry for not responding on time. I didn't see that. I'm sorry. I should probably have like a little notification thing, but I don't want it to come out in a video either. But yeah, if you're still there, thank you for joining. And then one more bite of chicken before I read more. All right. The young Hegelians against the Christian state. Combined with this radical rejection of religious consciousness went a Republican-inspired revision of Hegel's political philosophy. Bauer was provoked by the Cologne affair and the growing conservative clamor led by the reactionary philosopher F.J. Stahl to dismantle the Church Union of 1817 and restore ecclesiastical independence. He therefore published an anonymous pamphlet in 1840 pushing the case for state supremacy over the church far beyond anything dreamt by Altenstein. He said that during the Enlightenment, such objective consciousness had first given rise to universality in place of the mutilated picture of human essence found in religion. The Enlightenment had put forward a true idea of humankind. In this way, religious consciousness had given way to self-consciousness. Thereafter, the churches had lost any reason for independent existence. They were now no longer expressions of absolute spirit, but purely positive institutions without rational justification. The true location of free subjectivity had changed from the church to the state. The state, as Hegel taught, was the actuality of the ethical idea. The reason and freedom constituted its essence, and this meant that the state must stand with science and philosophy against all forms of positivity. But Hegel's fear of popular sovereignty had led him to an unsatisfactory compromise between state based on free subjectivity and the tutelage represented by absolutism. His picture had been of an universal suspended above particulars without a reciprocal relationship between them and, in practical terms, of the restriction of the capacity to make universal judgments to an official class. The young Hegelians therefore recast the state and Republican form. In Bauer's case, this meant a new way of interpreting the capacity of subjects to withdraw their will from any particular object and to place it into another. Hegel had confined his discussion in this negative moment of universality of the will to the sphere of abstract right, in effect the acquisition and exchange of property by individuals. Bauer, however, identified it with the general political activity of the state. The citizens of such state consisted of those capable of autonomy, in other words, of those capable of action according to the universal principles. What prevented the state from being what prevented the state from acting according to the universal norms were particular forms of religious consciousness and private economic interests. Prussia, therefore, would not only have to abandon the irrational, it would also have to move beyond the liberal constitutionalist form of the state, as Bauer outlined in his position at the famous Doctors' Club dinner, to which the king took such offense. Hegel was to be commended because he had identified freedom with the universality, and it was this association of the state with true universality that had made such a large strides during the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. By contrast, the defect both of Stahl's conservatism and Rotech's liberalism was that freedom was identified as a private interest. If Stahl prevailed, there would be a return to the Reformation with the state as no more than an external police force. But liberal constitutionalists also identified freedom with private right. By protecting religious particularism and economic individualism, these political philosophies held back the state as a vehicle of progress and free self-consciousness. I'm gonna plug in my speaker because I kind of figured that I could just put mute on the video and I can hear the notifications. It's been twice now that someone responds and I didn't see it because it's not connected to a speaker or anything. Let's see. Okay, it's not connected. Yep, it's connected. Never mind. So let me connect the computer. Okay. Mute on this. I should be getting like notifications now, hopefully. Yeah. Okay. Eat a little bit more rice. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Arnold Rouge also developed a Republican critique. He noted a growing interest in Prussian domestic politics, which he connected with a newfound sense of citizenship in the state. Such a development highlighted one of the principal defects of the philosophy of right, its lack of any notion of public virtue. Hegel had been deeply aware that the Germans had not yet received the state in the form of a state, but his treatise had been a child of a time that totally lacked public discussion and public life. He implicitly recognized the inadequacy of this position by distinguishing the dynastic familial state and the state of the need, no-stat, corresponding to civil society, from the free state as the actuality of the ethical idea. This free state, as Hegel had implied in 1817, presupposed national representation, juries, and freedoms of the press, which the Germans almost totally lacked. Institutions that raised humans in their total worth and in the full light of public consciousness to creators of their own freedom. But both Kant and Hegel had been diplomats. In Kant's case, Protestant narrowness had led to a conception of freedom only as freedom of consciousness, a position that recognized no other virtue than the private virtue of inward self-congratulation, a virtue of moralistic, self-directed subjects, not state citizens. Hegel as well had not escaped the abstract inwardness of the Protestantism. In his case, it led to the illusion that one could only be theoretically free without being politically free. Hegel had also been ready to tolerate appearances from his theoretical standpoint of Olympian repose. He had looked at everything that reason had made, and it was good. He veered away from this nasty should of praxis. After Strauss, this stance had become impossible. Now the times were political. Hegel had started from logic, but logic did not confront the problem of existence. It was impossible to grasp the state of absolutely by detaching it from history. Only with the entry of history into the realm of science does existence assume relevance. Yet history had not been discussed in the philosophy of right. In a clear summary of the young Hegelian position, Rouge wrote, "The historical process is the relating of theory to the historical existence of the spirit. This relationship is critique. Conversely, the philosophy of right raises existence or historical determinations to logical determinations. By failing to distinguish between the historical and metaphysical, Hegel had become engaged in a foolish juggling act in which the hereditary monarch and the bicameral system were turned into logical necessities. The net result had been that while in Catholic countries such as France, spiritual freedom had been hindered, in Germany, political freedom had been hindered by Protestant abstraction, which had reached its highest point in Hegel. One probable, if unmentioned, source of Rouge's line of criticism was the lecture series of positive philosophy delivered by Schelling in Berlin in 1841. Schelling started from the premise that the structure of thought was not identical to that of theory. Schelling claimed that Hegel's philosophy and the absolute idealism which he himself had once espoused were only negative. It could only explain what happened once there was a world, but had nothing to say about the fact that there was a world. Hegel had removed this problem of the facticity of the world by treating being as part of a structure reflection rather than the ground of the structure. But if reason could not account for the fact of its own existence, it would therefore be necessary to begin, not with reason, but with the contingency of being. Hegel's dialectic could say nothing about existence, nor could existence be absorbed into Hegel's system. There was thus a wide ugly moat between Hegel's logic and his philosophy of nature, or what Lessing had earlier called necessary truths of reason and contingent truths of history. According to Schelling, existence and idea, the world and good, could not be synthesized in thought, but they could be conjoined through will. Free will and existence conjoined in a theistic metaphysics would then form the basis of Schelling's positive philosophy. Ooh, we're almost there. Let me eat this real quick. Let me munch. Hello, my one viewer. You and I are gonna be so educated. All right. Marx had gravitated towards the young Hegelian circle in Berlin in the summer of 1837. His particular mentor was Bruno Bauer, whose lectures on the prophet Isaiah Marx was recorded as attending in 1839. Bauer remained the dominant force in Marx's intellectual development through the beginning of 1843. Not only was he probably the supervisor of Marx's doctorate, but a close intellectual and political collaboration developed between them. In 1841, they had jointly planned a new journal to be called the Archives of Atheism, and Marx followed Bauer to Bonn after his transfer from Berlin. The impact of Bauer was clear in Marx's doctorate. Difference between the Democritean and the Epicurean philosophy of nature. Philosophy, Marx declared, took its stand against all heavenly and earthly gods who do not acknowledge human self-consciousness as the highest divinity. Epicurus, rather than the materialist and determinist, Democritus was the hero of the dissertation because he stood for the absoluteness and freedom of self-consciousness. The choice of topic was also politically relevant, for the relationship of the Epicureans, Stoics, and Skeptics to Aristotle could be compared with that of the young Hegelians to Hegel. Though these were unhappy and iron epochs in which the old gods had died and the new gods will still lack the colors of the day. Unity created by a great system became discord, and philosophy turned once more against the world of appearance. Like other young Hegelians, Marx believed that the crucial means by which to secure transition to a new epoch was the will in the form of criticism. Philosophy was the critique that measures the individual existence by the essence, the particular reality by the idea. In this epoch, what was inner light has become consuming flame. The result is that as the world becomes philosophical, philosophy also becomes worldly. Marx could scarcely have been surprised by the final dismissal of Bauer from his post at Bonn in April 1842, and he would already have known that this would mean the end of his own chances of academic employment. If he expressed no regret, it was no doubt because interesting opportunities have opened up in journalism, just as those in academia were closing down. At the end of 1841, a liberalization of the Prussian press laws had led a group of leading liberals from Cologne to found the Rhenish newspaper. Marx had been involved in the discussions that led to the launching of the newspaper from the start. He became its editor in the autumn of 1842 and remained so until it was closed down in the spring of the following year. From a young Hegelian perspective, his move could hardly have been better timed. Criticism had dismantled the claims of Christianity. The next task was public enlightenment. On the Rhenish Zeitung, Marx appears to have remained close to the positions voiced by Bauer and Rouge. Religious particularism and private material interest in combination with the Christian state were contrasted with the state as moral and rational commonwealth. Bauer had argued that the state was the only form in which the infinity of reason and freedom, the highest goods of the human spirit, exist in reality. Marx, as editor of the Zeitung, emphasized the same point. The state was the great organism in which legal, moral, and political freedom must be realized. Marx also shared Bauer's view that the religious party was the most dangerous in the Rhine area, but the peculiar situation of the newspaper as a liberal, Protestant, and Prussian outpost in a heavily Catholic province meant that religious issue had to be treated with kid gloves. For this reason, Marx, as editor, rejected atheist scribblings from the successors to the doctors' clubs in Berlin, not calling them the free. He also published his own personal contribution on theology, a short defense of Bauer's interpretation of the synoptic gospels in Rouge's journal. Instead, he concentrated upon the other major obstacle to the emergence of a republican state, the dominance of private interest. Debates in the Rhine province assembly about freedom of the press and about revisions to the law concerning the collection of deadwood by peasants in the forest provided him with ample opportunity to elaborate on the theme. Delegates were ridiculed for attempting to treat press freedom as a form of freedom of trade. In the case of the forest laws, there should not have been a moment's delay in sacrificing the representation of particular interests to the representation of the interests of the province. But delegates wavered between the deliberate obduracy of privilege and the natural impotence of half-hearted liberalism. In some, it showed what is to be expected from an assembly of a state's particular interest if it were ever seriously called upon to make laws. Yeah, they need to start making books like this easier to read. Like, this is hard to read. They make this shit hard to read on purpose. For obvious reasons, Marx avoided a direct attack upon the Christian state, but it was implicit in his concept of the state as a realization of rational freedom. The bedrock of this rational state was the law. The law comprised the positive, clear, universal norms in which freedom has acquired an impersonal theoretical existence. Censorship, on the other hand, was not part of the law. It belonged to the unfreedom and the world outlook of semblance. In the light of the hostility of the Christian state of Frederick William IV, the current danger was of sacrificing the immortality of the law to finite private interest and the arbitrariness of censorship. For this reason, the immediate priority was to champion a free press. The free press was the ubiquitous vigilant eye of people's souls. It would recall the state to its inner principle as the embodiment of reason and freedom. Behind Marx's confidence lay the assumption, common to most of the young Hegelians, that criticism was only making conscious the real desires of the people. Though the activity of the free press, reason and freedom would rapidly triumph over the Christian state. It therefore came as a considerable shock when, in the first few months of 1843, the government closed down the Zeitung and the other opposition publications. The political strategy of the young Hegelians was now in tatters. How now could Germany change if all public means of expression were denied to philosophy? How could it still be maintained that the inner principle of the modern state was the actualization of reason and freedom, when it was the state that had abolished free press? Finally, why had there been so little opposition to the government suppression of the free press? In 1842, the young Hegelians had believed themselves to be part of a broader Prussian reform movement campaigning for representative government and the liberal freedoms. The Zeitung had been set up by the leading liberals of the Rhineland. Surely they would not now accept its summary closure. In France in 1830, when the last Bourbon King Charles V had attempted to close down the liberal press, he had provoked the July Revolution. Why then in Prussia had the action of the government been accepted with hardly a murmur of protest? It was in an attempt to find answers to these questions that, in the course of 1843, Marx moved from a Republican position shared by all the leading young Hegelians towards his own highly individual version of communism. We're there, guys. We're at the next chapter. I feel like this was like the thickest chapter, man. We've got this much more to read, guys. God damn! We're only 1/3 of the way there. This is such a hard read. I will say that. It's such a hard read. I'm gonna eat real quick. I'm gonna change the info because it's One Piece time. All right. Let me update it on all of them. Okay. I'm gonna try and find the spoilers online. Where are the spoilers? I saw them earlier. Let me see. Pew Piece usually puts it on. Okay. Yep. What the heck? Huh? Yeah, I put two, that's crazy. You can even put like two tabs in one. It's crazy. Okay. What the heck? All right. All right. Like I said, let me eat this real quick, guys, and then we're gonna read the spoilers. You see my kitty? Taco. Yeah. I forgot that I was on live for a second. Damn, no one liked my shit, huh? I asked my Instagram if I should post some of my art in an art show, and I didn't get no love.
I'm stuck in fucking traffic and I'm about to lose my goddamn mind. Breaking fuck the news. JD Vance just had a live press.
We're all gonna fucking burn in this country, bruh. Alright, I'm fucking done eating. Let me put my plate up. Sorry about that. My one viewer. And no, you don't like to be waited on, or you don't like to wait on me? I have not seen the full spoilers, so I'm excited. I'm gonna be honest. All right. How do I? I want to take this out. Oh, whatever. All right. Yeah, this is the first one. Okay, more details of the chapter. Thanks to read on from Arlong Park forums. This week's spoilers are very complete, so I can only add these details of the chapter by myself. Chapter of 17 pages. Okay. Chapter 1175, Nidhogg. In Japanese kanjis means thunder dragon. Reader request on the cover, Sabo being surrounded by baby koalas. Is he gonna have babies with koalas? Is that what it's giving? Koala is having tea and eucalyptus leaves with an adult koala while Sabo looks after baby koalas. Chapter starts with Sanji releasing Robin from Sommer's vines with Diable Jambe. He kicks and destroys the vines. Loki and Luffy, that still wears his original clothes, not Oda's mistake in last chapter, take the children and watch their relatives to the western, and the children to the western village near where Ja Rule is. Summers is furious because the plan has gone awry, so he decides to shoot thorns to the children's relatives, who are still very injured from trying to save the children a little while earlier, but the children decide to line up in front of their relatives to stop the thorns. Ripley, please call and run. Colin, I won't. I will protect you, Mommy. Fortunately, Zoro arrives just in time and blocks all the thorns. Luffy, good job, Zoro. I knew I can trust you. Ha 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 ha. Zoro, I figured that's what you had in mind. Now do it. Summers, what the hell? Who is that? Luffy, he's from my crew and his name is Zoro. Don't you forget that. Luffy grabs with his left hand a lightning bolt from a cloud and uses his right hand as a telescope sight to keep his eyes on Summers. Then Luffy attacks Summers with a new technique, Gomu Gomu no Dan Thor rifle. This man did some. He said, let me go get the thunder. Grab the thunder. He got the eye. He said, yeah. That's what Luffy said, to be honest. Young Luffy. That boy, young Luffy. But, okay. Damn, Japanese kanji means, and Japanese kanjis means white thunder rotating bullet. He says and a fucking epic double. I'm dead. And a fucking epic double page. Luffy's giant punch hits savagely Summer's body and electrocutes him at the same time. The attack is so powerful that Summer's body breaks into pieces. We see how Summer loses his teeth as his face splits into several parts. Damn. But Summer's suffering does not end here. In another amazing double panel page, Loki stomped on Summer's. Loki stomped on Summers. Oh man. Then in a little flashback, Jaro remembers what happened when Loki left the Arus castle after he killed Harald. Jaro explained what's the fruit Loki ate to Gaban and Shanks. Jaro, Loki ate Rio no Mi, dragon fruit, mythical type Nidhogg. Whoever eats it will obtain the form of the world's largest dragon. However, the limit to how large one can get wielding its power is dependent on the user's original size. And so compared to a human, a giant can draw out more of the fruit's potential. And an ancient giant can draw out even more than a giant. At its largest, this thunder-breathing pitch, black dragon is said to be able to turn day into night when it takes flight. Day into night? Huh. Shanks, so you guys decided to forbid anyone from eating it due to how dangerous the power is? No, Jarwell says, that's not it. If one attempts to eat it, the guardian hammer Ragnar will interfere. In Elbaf, we have a legend regarding a warring deity who's said to wield the weapon Ragnar. They say he turned into a gigantic dragon and went against the sun god. And besides him was his trusted servant, Ratatoskr, the ice squirrel. When the warring deity died, Ratatoskr's spirit passed into his master's hammer. And ever since, Ragnar has protected that Akuma no Mi until someone powerful enough could inherit it. Back to the present. Loki is focused now in the MMA monsters. In the absolute epic final double page of the chapter, Loki shoots a massive lightning attack from his mouth called Thorheim. Damn. And kanji means Thunderworld. The attack creates a huge explosion with normal and black lightning and destroys most of the MMA monsters. Chapter ends with Imu Gunko looking at Loki, Luffy, and Ragnar as MMA monsters are vanishing. Then there is a change of scene to Mary Joie. Real Emu is standing in the room of flowers, and we see Emu's furious eyes in the last panel of the chapter. Emu, I see. Nidhogg. That's where thou have been all this time. End of chapter. No break next week. So, weekly Shonen Jump cover for One Piece and color spread next week. That's epic, y'all. Let's look at the responses. Let's see. Y'all think I'm crazy in the earlier spoiler, but understand Rock said he idolized OG Davy. Rox knew about the fruit. Once Rox met Harold, he wanted Harold to eat it. OG Davy was previous Nidhogg user and an ancient giant. How else would Rox know about the details of the fruit and that he wanted until he met Harold? That's not a bad. It's not a bad one. Plus, you gotta be from Elbaf to know that lore. Not even Shanks and Gaban nor Emu knew about that fruit being there and how it works. Only Emu would know how it works, but OG Davy must be an ancient giant. Not bad. Poor Usopp, he is not getting any fucking love this arc at all. No one hypes up that man Zoro more than Luffy. That's true. Luffy broke Summers into pieces might be the most brutal attack we have seen so far. Oda is making Summers a punching bag. I'm literally crying. I'm actually crying. Zoro future sight tease. Figured that's what you were gonna do. Ooh, yes. Okay. Yeah, we don't be getting much love for Sanji. Yeah. Greatest duo in One Piece history. Yup. Yeah, this is gonna be so fucking lit when it's fucking animated, y'all. It's gonna be so good. Can't even imagine how it's gonna look. I love Sanji so. You see my little fish over here? That's me, my little fish. Warland the Elbaf. That's so funny. All right, guys, I'm gonna head out. I am tired. It was great reading these spoilers with you guys. I'm also still feeling a little tired and sore from the these past couple of days, so I'm gonna end it. But thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I appreciate you, my one viewer.